We are 10 days from Christmas Eve, 11 days from Christmas Day. The excitement for Christmas is palpable, is in the air. You feel it, hopefully, everywhere around you. Excitement for Christ's birth, coming again, the promise that it holds. We are so excited and ready, and all of the things that lead us to that day are ramping up and driving us forward to that wonderful and joyous celebration. Even here in Advent, we find ourselves excited for Christ's birth again with us, returning to be with us once more, returning again as an infant child, come into this world to change this world. And yet we also find us here in this season of Advent with all of that excitement, all of that nervous energy and anxiousness, called to patience. The first words we hear from James today, be patient. Now I'll admit something, and some of you may have picked up on this. I'm not a terribly patient person. Whether it's societal pressures or the personal success drive that is instilled in you from an early age, through the corporate world, through whatever it is, patience is not something that has always been my natural inclination. In fact, I've had to learn patience. I've had to learn to practice patience, to understand people operate on a different timeline than I do. And of course, children in particular have been a big source of that learning of patience, but I've also learned it in a number of other facets of my life. When I worked in campus ministries, working on a college schedule, it's a weird time, particularly since my college schedule was not a typical college schedule. I was on the rowing team. I was up at 5 a.m. every morning. That's not a typical college schedule. So when I worked in campus ministries, that was my first experience of a typical college schedule, and it was weird. And also, as someone who'd been out of college for a couple of years already, going back into the college environment and working with freshmen, you learn a lot of patience with people who are experiencing life on their own for the first time. And then in seminary, living in a somewhat intentional community where you are eating and studying and worshiping and going to class with and sharing space with and basically spending every waking moment with the same people every single day for 3 years, you have to learn patience. Particularly when you go through periods where your personality and someone else's personality are rubbing against each other and causing friction. And even as a priest, I've had to learn patience, learning when to let go for the betterment of ministry around me, for my own ministry, and also to enable others to step in and lead. And so I wondered this week if perhaps this call to patience is part of why Advent holds such a strong place in my heart. Because this season of Advent sets itself apart in this call for patience. It sets itself apart from the world around us in this time of our seasonal anxiety and seasonal pressures that don't ask us to be patient. And also, it sets itself apart from the focal point of any other season in the church calendar. This explicit call to patience is unique here in Advent. We find ourselves waiting for that precious crop from the earth to grow that must be watered with both the early and the late rains. Perhaps this is why when we look around the world and we see those modern doomsday prophets, we don't pay them a whole lot of attention because they have no patience. They tell you the world, the end is nigh. They give you exact dates when the world is going to end. There is no patience in that. But we know in this season we are called to patience. We're called to wait for Christ's return with patience, to be ready, but also to be patient. And this call to patience comes to us in our readings today in John and Jesus' interaction in the gospel, and in the Song of Mary that we read before that in Canticle 15. John asks Jesus today, "Are you the one? Or are we to wait for another?" John is currently in prison because he is upsetting the uneasy peace imposed by the occupying Roman Empire. And yet, even in prison, John has hope. And John expresses that hope with a commitment to patience and waiting. Are you the one? And if not, are we to continue waiting for another? I'm happy to keep waiting. I'm happy to keep living this life in patience, waiting for the one who is to come, if it is not you. The faith and the hope are not lost, even in the most dire of circumstances. And Jesus responds by saying, "Tell John all the things that you see happening in this world. Tell John that you see reality shifting before your very eyes." We also read together the Song of Mary today, a song of faith and hope. Mary's song says that God has accomplished these things, and that God will accomplish these things. For us, it's clear, and in Mary, as she sings the song with Jesus in her womb, Jesus is the vessel through which these things will be accomplished. And yet we look around us today, and we wonder if they have or will happen. What is our call to patience as we consider the Song of Mary? The mighty being thrown down, the lowly being lifted, the hungry being fed, the rich being sent away empty. Be patient, James calls out to us. Be patient today, now. This work takes generations. This work happens on your timeline, but it is not on God's time. God's time is different. God's time is not your time. So continue to foster the crop. Strengthen your hearts. Be prepared, for see, the judge is standing at the doors. You do not know the time when the judge will come. So be prepared and be patient in your waiting. As we build an anticipation for the birth of Christ on Christmas and the return of Christ at Christmas, we must be patient. We must continue to engage in our work of following Christ in this world today. We must continue to love our neighbor, all of our neighbors. We cannot rush to the end of this story, especially as the story is just beginning. And I think it's especially important on days like today to be reminded of this call of patience in our faith as we look at the world and even just the past 24 hours, where we see examples of gun violence and anti-Semitism happening all across the world, with shootings at Brown University and Bondi Beach in Australia at a Hanukkah celebration. These terrible and senseless acts of violence leave us questioning, is Christ coming? Will Christ come again to save us from these senseless acts of violence? We have to be reminded and held up in our faith and our hope that Jesus' birth, as with his death and resurrection, changes the very fabric of our reality. And We do still live and move and have our being in this creation. So our patience must be part of our faith as we work to follow Christ. Especially in the face of violence in our world, we have to continue pointing to the light of Christ in this world, a light that welcomes all, a light that creates a safe harbor for all, a light that pushes out the darkness in this world, a light that calls us to be welcoming, to be loving, to caring for our neighbors, to advocate for our neighbors, to continue to speak out against actions of violence and hate in this world. When we do this work of following Christ, we fulfill the promise of his birth that is sung by Mary. We fulfill the promise of his birth through our patience and hope as we continue to do the work that he calls us to do. We continue to follow Christ as we are patient in this season, as we await Christ's birth with us for the first time that Christmas day in Bethlehem, and that return of Christ that will come again. Amen.